Severson. Present.
Frank is here on video.
Thank you. Williamson. Here. Curry. Fleming. Voice. Here. McGuire. You have a quorum.
Thank you. And I know some people are joining us on WebEx tonight. So I'll try to recognize you. I'll keep an eye on my screen. Giving the invocation tonight, and I've just met this gentleman and I like him already. His name and title is Reverend Dr. Ray Diaz, and his churches are Peace and Trinity United Methodist. Sir, please lead us. You want us to stand?
Eternal Father, we come before you tonight to recognize your presence among us. We gather together in this place to deal with the issues related to this county. We pray for wisdom as we listen to one another and make decisions related to this board. Dear Lord, thank you for this community that they serve you and the way they serve among one another on this board. We are representing the people of this community. As we engage in conversation about the problem and concern we are facing in this community, give us the patience to listen to one another, highlight the issues that need solutions, and agree to disagree in a friendly and loving way. Above all, help us to serve one another, encourage one another, and work together for the good of this community. We pray in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Amen. Now I had to excuse because I have another meeting.
Mr. Kalish, would you please lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag justice for all.
We have a 26-point agenda before us. And would you please take a quick look at that? And if you think this ought to be our agenda, somebody make a motion and we'll adopt it. Mr. Cooey, seconded by Mrs. Glassbrenner. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We have an agenda. The minutes of July 19th were included in your packet. Does anyone have any issues, corrections, amendments? If not, I'm going to declare them approved as published. Number 6, an ordinance relating to a parcel belonging to CKC Partnership, Ted Chitwood, in the town of Richland. Mr. Kalish.
This will be ordinance number 22-9, amendment number 551 to Richland County Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance number 5. That the following described 3.3 acre parcel belonging to CKC Partnership / Ted Chitwood and in the town of Richwood is hereby rezoned from the General Agricultural and Forestry District to the Single Family Residential. This ordinance shall be effective on August 16th, 2022, and is being offered to you by the Land and Zoning Standing Committee.
Thank you. You've heard the
I'm
ordinance.
on.
What's your pleasure? Mr. Williamson, seconded by Mr. McKee. Okay, Mr. Bindle, zoning administrator, do you want to comment on this?
I don't really want to comment on it, but what the background on this is actually that CKC Partnership is several siblings, and one of the siblings is going to purchase the farm buildings that's being split off from the rest of the ag land.
Thank you. Pretty simple procedure. Okay, any other questions? If not, all those in favor of adopting the ordinance signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted. I'm sorry, the WebEx
Does
people,
Derek-
I'm a little slow. I'll give you a
Does
chance
Derek
to vote.
have,
Yeah, is
does
that
Derek
Linda?
have the agenda on?
Sorry, do I have what on, Linda?
Have you got me down as attending? It's Linda.
Yes,
It's
it's
Linda.
7:05.
Okay,
Okay.
great. Number 7. Report on petitions for zoning amendments received since the last county board session, Mike.
There is a petition by Kim Snyder and Greg and Jeff Beely to rezone 33.42 acres from ag forestry to ag residential in section 4, town Buena Vista. There's a petition by Schmitz LLC to rezone 3 acres from ag forestry to residential 2, section 1, town of Orion. A petition by Chris Woolley to rezone 16.5 acres from ag forestry to ag residential in section 31, Buena Vista. There is a petition by Jim and Sandra Matthews to rezone 8.25 acres from ag forestry to residential or ag residential to section 31, town forest. And a petition by Ash Creek United Methodist Church, Anderson County Highway Department to rezone 2.3 acres from ag forestry to residential 2, section 3, town of Orion.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Do you have any petitions recommended for denial by zoning and land information?
No.
Thank you. Number 9, a resolution of condolence to the family of Carol Clausius. Mr. Kalish.
This will be resolution number 22-83. Now therefore be it resolved by the Richland County Board of Supervisors that said Board of Supervisors does, as a body, hereby express its sincere sympathy regarding the death of Carol Clausius to her surviving family, and be it further resolved that the county clerk is hereby directed to send a copy of this resolution to Carol Clausius' surviving family. This resolution is being offered to you by the Rules and Strategic Planning Standing Committee.
You've heard the resolution. What's your pleasure? Mr. Severson, seconded by Mrs. Rudersdorf. Carol was a great board member. I enjoyed her comments and her participation over the years. So, all those in favor of this resolution signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The resolution is adopted. Thank you. A resolution making a fund transfer to the Richland County Fair Revolving Fund. Mr. Kalish.
This will be resolution number 22-84. Now therefore be it resolved by the Richland County Board of Supervisors that $15,000 is hereby temporarily transferred from the general fund to the Richland County Fair Revolving Fund 68 for use by the Fair Recycling and Park Standing Committee in conducting the 2022 Richland County Fair, with this appropriation being for a period of 30 days. Be it further resolved that the $15,000 be transferred back to the County Fair Revolving Fund to the general fund by not later than October 1 of 2022. Be it further resolved that this resolution shall be effective immediately upon its passage and publication, and this resolution is being offered to you by the Finance and Personnel Standing Committee.
You've heard the resolution. What's your pleasure, Mrs. Rudersdorf? Seconded by Mr. Manning. We do this every year to get them started. All those in favor of the resolution signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The resolution is adopted. Number 11, the resolution approving the restructuring of the Aging and Disability Resource Center, ADRC, of Eagle Country. Mr. Kalish.
This will be resolution number 22-85. Now therefore be it resolved that approval is hereby granted, authorizing the restructuring of the ADRC by dissolving the ADRC of Eagle Country 4 County Region as is currently structured, and authorize a new entity to reapply to the Office of Resource Center Development as a 3-county region named the ADRC of Eagle Country, with Juneau, Richland, and Crawford as the cooperating counties effective January 1 of 2023. Be it further resolved that approval authorizes Juneau County to continue as a fiscal agent of the ADRC of Eagle Country Region, and Health and Human Services Director Tricia Clements is hereby authorized to sign on behalf of the county any documents necessary to carry out this resolution. Be it further resolved that this resolution shall be effective immediately upon its passage and publication, and this is being offered to you by the county board members of the Health and Human Services and Veteran Standing Committee.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
You've heard the resolution. What's your pleasure?
I move for adoption, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Seep, seconded by Mr. Renish.
I'd like to speak in support of the resolution after background is presented.
Okay, well, Tricia Clements, the director of HHS, is here, and I'm going to ask her to comment.
All right. For the last several years, Sauk County every year will have on their ADRC advisory board or ADRC board to leave the region. And so the other three counties have gotten together, have gotten together and have decided, instead of having to go through that turmoil every year, to have a region with just the three counties. All three work very well together, and we feel this would be a good option for us.
Thank you. Mr. Seep?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a member of the regional ADRC board, and this issue has been discussed and ruminated over for a long period of time. It's actually for the last 3 or 4 years, and I fully support it. The board is unanimously in support of this resolution, and in the end, is to the benefit of the district, the newly proposed 3-county district, and it's not only to the benefit of us in terms of the mission, but it is a benefit financially to us. Thank you.
Mrs. Glassman has a comment.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Director Clements can correct me if I'm wrong, but as to what Don said, as far as financial benefits as well, I believe because of the way the allocations work, we will actually get, is it 80,000?
Yeah, the remaining three counties will have an additional 80,000 to work with.
As if we were in the 4-county region.
So I want to remind everyone to speak into your microphone so the people on WebEx can hear and so we can all hear you.
Do you want me to speak again?
Do you want to speak again?
Did you hear me?
Yes, we heard you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Didn't hear Ingrid very well. And Tricia got better. Okay. You've heard the reason. You've heard the new scheme. What's your pleasure? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the resolution is adopted. A resolution approving a contract for Corporation Council Services. Mr. Kalish.
This will be resolution number 22-86. Now therefore be it resolved by the Richland County Board of Supervisors that they approves the Richland County Administrator to enter into a contract with App Swain Law Firm to perform Corporation Council Services on behalf of Richland County, and be it further resolved that this resolution shall be effective retroactively from July 2nd of 2022 through July 2nd of 2024, and this resolution is being offered to you by the Finance and Personnel Standing Committee.
You've heard the resolution. What's your pleasure? Mr. Manning? Seconded by Mrs. Boyce. Yeah, it's time for renewal. It seems like we just hired him, but how time flies when you're having fun. So, any comments? I think they've done a stellar job for us, so I'm quite happy. All those in favor of the resolution asking for renewal of the contract signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Congratulations, Attorney Wendell. Number 13, a resolution approving Richland County to enter into Phase 4 of the radio project management with True North Consulting Group. Mr. Kalish.
This will be resolution number 22-87. Now therefore be it resolved by the Richland County Board of Supervisors that approval is hereby granted for the county to enter into Phase 4 project management with True North Consulting Group in the amount of $196,000. Be it further resolved that Administrator Clinton Langreck is hereby authorized to sign on behalf of the county contracts in accordance with this resolution. And be it further resolved that this resolution shall be effective immediately upon its passage and publication. And this is being offered to you by the Public Safety Standing Committee.
Okay, you've heard the resolution. What's your pleasure? Mrs. Luck, seconded by Mr. Cooey. Did you wish to speak to this now, Melissa?
I would, yes.
Melissa Luck will take the floor.
So tonight we'll be hopefully approving two contracts. That is the beginning of our radio tower project actually getting implemented. This one is for True North who will be the consulting group that will work with all of the vendors that we will need in order to complete the project. The second one is for the radio vendor itself. There will also be, later in the process, we will be entering into contracts with a civil engineer and another civil vendor as we go through the process. So I just want to, it's a little confusing in that when we first started talking about this, we knew that we were going to borrow up to 8.5 million, but we're never going to have one bill that comes in at 8.5 million. We will be paying individual contractors and stay within that 8.5 million. The other good news is that we have finalized how we will go forward with the borrowing. We won't borrow until January, and by that point, assuming that we pass, that we approve the resolution for the radio vendor tonight, they will get working on it, and by January, we should know how many towers we will need, and that way we will have a very solid number for what we actually need to borrow. If you recall, we approved an amount up to 8.5 million, but there's some unknowns. As we work through the process, we won't know for sure how many towers we need until we've gone through this first step. So by January, we should be able to answer that question, and we should have a solid number to know for sure what amount up to that 8.5 million we will need to complete the project. So this is the first step so that we can get actually working on the project and get our radio tower, and most importantly, get going on getting our dispatch consoles replaced, because those units are continuing to fail in very critical ways, and our ability to duct tape them and rubber band them together is becoming even more and more difficult. So we do need to move forward with this. It is a critical matter, and I highly encourage everyone to follow through on what we already decided, which was that we were going to proceed with this, with the borrowing and the radio tower project. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? If not, I'm going to call for a vote then, approving the Phase 4 of the radio project with True North Consulting Group. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we've passed that resolution. Then that takes us then to number 14, a resolution approving Richland County to enter into a contract with General Communications to build a radio communication system. Mr. Kalish.
This will be resolution number 22-88. Now therefore be it resolved by the Richland County Board of Supervisors that approval is hereby granted for the county to enter into a contract with General Communications in the amount of $2,757,688.45. Be it further resolved that Administrator Clinton Langreck is hereby authorized to sign on behalf of the county a contract in accordance with this resolution, and that this resolution shall be effective immediately upon its passage and publication. And this is being offered to you by the Public Safety Standing Committee.
You've heard the resolution. What's your pleasure? Mr. Renich, seconded by Mrs. Rudersdorf. Any more comments over there? I think what you said generally covered this as well. So it's another step here along the way. All those in favor of this resolution signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The resolution is adopted. Number 15, a resolution authorizing the participation in a Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation Idle Sites Redevelopment Program Grant. Mr. Kalish.
This will be resolution number 22-89. Now therefore be it resolved, the Richland County Board authorizes the participation in the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation's Idle Sites Redevelopment Program in partnership with Bethlehem Lutheran Church. And be it further resolved, the Richland County Board authorizes the county administrator and economic development director to complete all necessary documents and agreements associated with this project. Also, be it further resolved that this resolution shall be effective immediately upon its passage and publication. And this is being offered to you by the Finance and Personnel Standing Committee.
You've heard the resolution. What's your pleasure? Mr. Severson, seconded by Mr. Gotchall. So the resolution is before us. Joining us tonight is Reverend Dan. It isn't Luig, it's Luig. And it was my pleasure to tour the facility yesterday, and it's happening. So, Pastor Dan, if you want to comment, or maybe you're available for questions. Okay, and I see our Economic Development Director up there. Why don't you take the mic and give a quick explanation what we're doing here? Thank you. And
It's on now. There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so hopefully, as all of you would know by now, Pastor Dan's been working some time with the old Rockbridge School, converting that into a child care center. Of course, the county some time ago authorized a grant that was through the ARPA funds. And Dan continues to work really hard with plans out there. And he's got a great plan for expanding the site even further, offering playground equipment, really continuing to improve his classroom spaces. And this grant is what's called an Idle Sites Grant through Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. It's a grant where a project, if the site has been idle for some time, is eligible up to $500,000 in funds. And we think this particular fund, according to your resolution there, or this particular project would probably run somewhere around $400,000, I believe, Pastor Dan. And so he would be eligible for somewhere around $120,000 to $150,000, those types of numbers. Of course, they're still working very closely with WEDC. WEDC takes the lead on this. Our role is to act as an administrator for the grant. So the grant monies would come into Richland County and would be dispersed by Richland County. But Dan is responsible for doing the vast majority of the paperwork, making sure that WEDC has the completed application. My office would do some work on that as well, and then would also work with Pastor Dan to make sure a monitoring process is in place where we are not violating any elements of the grant. So we expect the grant to be active for approximately 1 year, and I think that's a pretty good summary unless there's questions, and Dan can get more specific.
thank you. And the man just speaking was Jason Glassbrenner, the Richland Economic Development Director. And he's very knowledgeable, knows a lot of things. Any questions, any comments? Mr. Reddish?
Am I on? Okay. So the grant is 120, 130,000, and you're expecting 400,000. Where are the rest of the funds coming from, and what kind of time frame?
So the rest of the funds will come from financing that has already been secured to cover the remaining portion. So we already have that lined up to do that, and then everything would be completed within that calendar year.
Yes, Mr. McGuire. Yeah, but they can't hear you. They can't hear you. They're on WebEx, Stan.
I was wondering, what other, are there similar conditions connected to this money, like there was the 1.2 million a year and a half ago? Project that the auditorium in Richland Center here and the park in Lone Rock. Is there similar conditions connected to it? It has to be something, is of value to the vast majority of all the residents of either a community or the county?
I would say yes, there are some similarities, but the community development block grants that we're working with are much more specific and much more focused on things like if you're low to moderate income, there's a whole bunch of elements of the grant that you have to do. Versus this one, it's a little bit lower threshold and much less investment of time on our office's behalf. So yeah, they are similar. They're very interested in investing in counties or communities that are economically distressed. So this grant, idle site grant, because our county is economically distressed, they're actually eligible for up to 50% of the funding through the grant versus counties that are non-economically distressed, which is only 25%. So there's always some similarities, but I think this is lower threshold. It's easier to use, but still very valuable for our county, obviously. I hope that answered.
Mrs. Weiss?
Are you working with other groups too that are trying to start childcare facilities?
Yes, my office has been working with Sunshine and Giggles, which is here in Richland Center.
The old Lincoln School?
The old Lincoln School, correct. And we worked with Pastor Dan. Of course, the county authorized a grant for, drawing a blank.
ARPA funds grant?
ARPA funds grant, yeah. Another ARPA funds grant for two other grants actually beside Pastor Dan. So there is an initiative for child care development in the town. There's also a child care and throughout the county. There's also a child care task force that is chaired by Chelsea Wanacke. And so they're working with a lot of other networks and organizations in the county to try to make sure that we're able to offer child care to people who need it.
Good, thank you.
The county was considered a child care desert. And now we're going to get them. Now what we need are kids. And I know they're out there. So, all right, you've heard the resolution. You've heard the explanation. Are you ready to vote, Dan? Dan, are you ready to vote? Okay. All those in favor of the resolution signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The resolution is adopted. Thank you. Number 16, a resolution directing the Joint Ambulance Committee to consider services, develop options, and propose a recommendation on future operations.
Can I ask a question about the order of the agenda?
Sure.
Would it be possible to take agenda item number 22 before 16 through 21? And the reason I'm asking is because I did work with Mr. Langrecht to develop an amendment to that one, and it's a pretty significant amendment. And I think my feelings on 16 through 21 would be greatly different if that amendment does not pass. I'm not sure if folks have had time to look at it. So I'm wondering if it's possible if we could discuss that one first.
I have no objection. Does anyone in the gallery have an objection? Mr. Severson?
Has the amendment been uploaded? So what we're seeing in our packet, is that the amendment that was in our packet from the start that it was uploaded?
22A is the document that's the amendment.
And that's been in there since Derek put it in?
I'm not sure.
It's been in there since I added it yesterday or the day before. It was after the initial load.
We get future updates next time that happens.
Mrs. Glassbender?
So, Sean, one thing I was wondering is on these two, which one, okay, so say it again, which one is the proposed amendment that you're bringing forward tonight?
So, the document that says 22-96 various standing committee, that's the one that the Finance and Personnel Committee passed.
Okay,
The document that says 22A, 22-96 amendment, various standing committee, that's the one that I worked on with Mr. Langreck. And that
Why don't
and
I,
that has not gone through any committee?
that has not been approved
Okay,
by a
because it
committee.
had votes at the end of it that were different than the previous one, and that's where I got confused.
So if it's amended, it's still a resolution offered by a committee, but then it's amended on the floor here. So it was not amended by a committee. It's proposed amendments right now for clarification's sake.
Right, I was just confused
Yep.
by the votes that were listed there
Sure.
at the bottom because they were different.
right now, we're discussing the agenda, and as the chair, I will take agenda item 22 then, in this order, and then after we dispose of 22, then we will take 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20 and 21.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, Mr. Kalish, agenda item 22, a resolution directing the various Richland County standing committees to consider services, develop options, and propose a recommendation on future operations. And I know, Mr. Kalish, we agreed that you can give a streamlined version of this, so go ahead.
Mr. Kalish, if you want me to kind of summarize it as I've spent a little bit more time on it.
Sure, that's fine.
Go
Okay,
ahead.
the be it therefore resolved items underneath 2296, and I'm looking at the proposed document as put through Finance and Personnel.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll speak up louder and I'll try to mumble less. The premise of this is it's giving directive guidance to the Health and Human Services and Veteran Service Standing Committee. It's giving guidance directives to Public Safety Standing Committee. It's giving guidance directives to the Public Works Standing Committee. And then the final element is it's giving directives guidance to Finance and Personnel Standing Committee. The first section kind of starting at the bottom of page 1, you're going to see it, the be it therefore resolved, where it's going to address then the directives to the Health and Human Services and Veterans Standing Committee. It's calling underneath paragraph 1, bullet 1, for service consideration matrix, and this is for a review of a document that was developed through rules and strategic planning of evaluating the programs based on elements proposed through the strategic plan. It's then calling for, under bullet 2, a levy expenditure reduction. It's calling for $350,000 of exploring possible courses of actions to reduce total projected levy operational expenses entering into 2024. The idea with those is those are sustainable reductions that are carried forward. Likewise, then, if you turn to the second page, Public Safety Standing Committee has the same bullet points then for the service matrix, and then a reduction of $350,000 entering into 2024, again, sustainable, that can carry forward. The same then for our Public Works Standing Committee, $350,000 entering into 2024. And then Finance and Personnel on the bottom of page 2 and going into page 3, again, a total projected levy operational expense reduction of $200,000 entering into 2024. And these are directives to these standing committees. They're finding these types of operational expenditure, projected levy operational expenditure reductions for the different budgets and the different departments that they oversee. Does that suffice, Mr. Chair?
Yes, until we have some questions. So why don't we get it before us? You've heard the resolution. Mr. Cooey, seconded by Mrs. Glassbender. Okay, it's before us. I'll invite Vice Chair Murphy Lopez to comment further.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to clarify that the votes that Supervisor Glassbrenner brought up being different, I did vote against this coming out of committee. I did not vote against the amendment because of course the amendment never came out of committee. So I just wanted to clarify that piece. I just sent folks a couple emails. I think the concern I brought to the Finance and Personnel Committee at our last meeting was that, and I don't expect everyone to follow all of these documents. I just sent them to you just in case you want to see them. There's one document I sent and there was an attached PDF. And this came from our last Finance and Personnel Committee meeting. It's 11A, financial planning. And this is basically the 5-year financial plan that Clint has been working so hard on. And it's a 17-page document, but the most important thing is on page 17. And that is the remaining gap in our budget that has not been addressed yet with all these resolutions. And that gap starting in the year 2025 is 1 million and it escalates to 2.5 million by 2027. So my concern with the resolution as written is that we actually weren't asking the various standing committees to address that actual budget gap we have. And so what I did is I worked with Clint to figure out what would it take to actually zero out all of those and have a balanced budget. And so there's another email that I sent and that has 2 attachments to it, one Excel and then one PDF. And the PDF is just a copy of the Excel in case Excel doesn't work open on your iPads there. And that PDF or that Excel, and this is the one that I worked on with Clint to figure out, what would the dollar amounts be to actually balance the budget. Instead of these numbers of 350K for each of the 3 big standing committees and 200K for the Finance and Personnel Committee, I figured out what percent each of those standing committees departments make up of our property tax levy to be more fair. So the Public Safety Committee makes up 42% of the property tax levy compared to those other 3 standing committees. That's followed by HHS and Veterans. They make up 26%. Public Works makes up 22%, and Finance and Personnel makes up 10%. So then figuring out what those additional gaps are, there's a section on that PDF that says budget gap projections. And 2024 is taken care of because we have 1.25 million that's already in this resolution that Finance and Personnel adopted. It's those next 3 years where we haven't figured out where that money would come from. So the figures have been recalculated to come up with what would the dollar amounts be that we would have to come up with to actually close the budget gap. And the reason I'm advocating for this is because on the referendum committee, we have to figure out if we go to referendum and we have a big dollar amount and it could potentially be up to 3 million based on these gaps that Clint has figured out. We have to explain to the public, if you vote no, what are you going to lose? And if we don't ask the Public Safety Committee and the Public Works Committee and the other two committees to actually come up with a list of what people would lose, then we'll have no way of educating the public. And there'll be poor communication going on between these various standing committees and the referendum committee and the Finance and Personnel Committee. So that's why I'm bringing it forward, and I'll stop talking. Hopefully that's enough information.
Do we need to address the amendment then? Because the resolution does not include the amended language, does it?
Well, I'll make a motion to amend using the language from document 22A.
Okay, do I have a second to that amendment? Mr. Cooey, seconds. Okay, let's vote on the amendment first. Mrs. Glassbender. What? So, yes, we can discuss the amendment.
So the amendments we're projecting up here is to take that first section with Health and Human Services and Veterans Services Standing Committee, striking the first paragraph for the surface consideration matrix, striking the second paragraph language of the levy, the projected levy operational expense reduction of $350,000, and replacing it with develop a recommended list of proposed projected levy reductions and comparing to the 2022 budget of $320,000 in 2024, $637,000 in 2025, $783,000 in 2026, $1,004,000 in 2027, including but not limited to lines 1.01 through 1.92 and 17.01 through 17.92 in the 5-year financial plan. So that's referencing some of the elements that are in there that are in the projections and in the desires and wants and plans for those types of years. Moving then to the section for Public Safety Standing Committee, striking the paragraph 3 and 4 in there and replacing it with develop a recommended list of proposed projected levy reductions in comparing to the 2022 budget of $531,000 in 2024, $1,058,000 in 2025, $1,301,000 in 2026, $1,668,000 in 2027, including but not limited to lines 3.01 through 5.91, 8.01 through 8.90, 10.1 through 11.91, and 24.01 through 25.91 in the 5-year financial plan. Likewise then for Public Works Committee, striking paragraphs 5 and 6 and including develop a recommended list of proposed projected levy reductions and comparing to 2022 budget of $278,000 in 2024, $554,000 in 2025, $681,000 in 2026, $873,000 in 2027, including but not limited to lines 2.01 through 2.91 and 18.01 through 20.91 in the 5-year financial plan. And then finally, the Finance and Personnel Standing Committee, striking paragraphs 7 and 8, and then adding a paragraph of develop recommended list of proposed projected levy reductions and comparing to 2022 budget of $122,000 in 2024, $243,000 in 2025, $299,000 in 2026, $383,000 in 2027, including but not limited to lines 6.01 through 6.91, 13.01 through 14.91, and 21.01 through 22.91 in 5-year fiscal plan. And then changing the date of asking the committees to respond back by October 31st, 2022 in efforts to try to gather those informations and list of proposed reductions to help efforts with the referendum ad hoc committee. Did I state that all correctly, Mr. Vice?
Mrs. Luck?
Can I just ask Supervisor Murphy Lopez, can you just clarify when you're going through those dollar values, that's not 122,000 and then an additional 243,000 the next year, that 243, like I'm on the last one right now, the finance and personnel. That's the cumulative amount. It's not a new amount each year. Like we don't have to cut an additional 243,000. It includes the 122 that we cut the year before, correct?
That's correct.
Okay,
And
I just
so-
want to make sure because I think otherwise the numbers get super overwhelming.
Yeah, but if you think about the escalating wages, health insurance, FICA, all the things associated with each position, you know, say one committee decides we would have to reduce 5 positions. Well, those 5 positions, you know, you'd have to see if those 5 positions as they grow in wages and benefits, if they come close to matching that number.
Right.
So that's the point of the escalating numbers.
Mrs. Glassman?
Mr. Chair, so I just want to clarify, when you stated the reasons why you are putting this amendment forward, this is when we're presenting it to the public. If this referendum does not pass, these are the cuts that so this is a proposed if that were to not happen, if the referendum failed.
That's right. That's one of the big reasons. I think another reason potentially, and there might be others that I'm not thinking of, but just off the top of my head, another reason is that if we go to referendum, the referendum committee hasn't yet decided how long that should be, if it should be, say, 5 years or indefinitely. But from what I can tell from the committee so far, there's not and other committee members can speak to this, it doesn't seem like there's going to be appetite to go into referendum and then coming back in 2 years and coming back for another referendum for that million we're short, and then coming back, the next year for the additional whatever amount that we're short. I think there's some desire to be upfront with everyone all at once about what the needs are. So that could be another purpose, so that we're not constantly coming back and trying to make budget cuts again. If we do it this way, this should take care of the next 5 years, according to the financial plan. Not that the financial plan wouldn't need to be adjusted every year, but at least we're taking care of the big stuff up front.
Thank you. And one more question. When you stated on that PDF that you sent that shows the amount of tax levy that each of the larger committees is portioned. So like, for example, public safety was the highest. Were you following that in these projections? Because it didn't seem like the numbers lined up necessarily as far as the amount that you were asking to reduce by the proportion. But maybe obviously I haven't sat down and done the math.
So if you go to that PDF, that one-page PDF,
Yes.
and if you go to the column that says total 2022 levy, which is about 7 columns over from the left, in the top area, it says total 2022 levy. HHS and veterans, their 2022 levy is 2.5 million. Public safeties is 4.1 million. Public works is 2.2 million. And then finance and personnel is 0.9 million. So that all adds up to almost 10 million. So if you take each one of those figures and divide it by that almost $10 million figure, you'll get the percent for each committee. Then what I did under budget gap projections, which is in the next section below, on the very left side, is I took, and Clint checked all my math and we did this together, is I took those percents times the remaining gap that was in that financial planning worksheet. So we could see what percent should each standing committee be responsible for coming up with for that remaining budget gap. So that's how we came up with the figures, and they're all laid out right there. And I also sent the spreadsheet so you could look at the cells to see how we calculated the formulas to come up with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we've been discussing the amendment, and we should be discussing now the resolution. But the amendment's before us, so I'm going to call a vote on Mr. Severson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just would like some clarification here. So with the Public Safety Committee, projection from 2020 to 2023, I guess, until 2027, there's going to be a $1.1 million levy reduction in that committee.
It would actually be higher. That's to 2025 is 1.1 million. To 2027 is 1.7 million. So it's very high. And part of the reason I wanted everyone to see these numbers was there's pressure to keep raising wages. That happened at the last Finance and Personnel Committee meeting. I voted against that because I thought once people see what the actual impact is to the department and how many cuts are going to have to be made, the wage increases might not look so appealing anymore. So my effort here is just, let's look at the big picture. Let's not, get too narrow looking at just wage increases, and everyone wants those, but look at these cuts that are going to happen giving these wage increases. So I'm hoping this is a reality check for departments and for standing committees. Like, wage increases cost a lot. So we just have to be careful. So I know it's a shocking number, but this is what it would take if we want to do everything in our in our strategic plan, and if we want to give those wage increases. So now they might be looking back and say, oh, maybe we don't want that extra position that we were advocating for. Maybe we can't afford that. Maybe we'd rather keep our patrol deputies instead of that extra radio tower position. Those are some of the decisions that are going to have to be looked at with these numbers.
So if this passes, what's the projection then in 2027 the cuts to the sheriff's department if the county board decides not to go to referendum?
It would be
Are
one.
we not gonna have any law enforcement then to protect us?
It'd be 1.7 million. No, it would be up to the committee to figure out what reductions to recommend. But this is the issue, and this is why it's been a little frustrating for me, and I'm sorry to bring all this here, but, you know, how do we know what we're gonna have to cut unless we actually do this? The $350,000 figure is not realistic. It's not gonna balance our budget.
I don't think any of this is.
This will balance the budget, these
It'll
numbers.
balance it, but is it in the best need of our constituents?
I'm not saying it is. I mean, I think that's why we're advocating for a referendum, because there is no way to do all this stuff unless we bring in additional revenue.
Mr. Seep?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Sean, for all of this very diligent work. We're getting the answer here from these numbers. It tells us that in order to continue to maintain these services, we need this much money. And if we put this choice to the public, it's their decision as to whether or not those services are continued. And the only way to continue and to fill this gap after we've done all that we can here as a county board, the only way that we're going to fill this gap is by a referendum. Otherwise, the cuts have to occur. It's pretty simple.
Mr. McGuire?
Sean, I'm a long-time school board member, okay, and I've been involved in many referendums. And I don't think you can put that referendum out there unless you put down, if you're gonna lose a position or a department or a service, it has to be on the referendum. What's gonna go away if this fails? The voters have to know what fails or what's gonna be maintained. So I don't think you can put it out there and say, well, now we have to decide what's gonna be cut. I don't think we can do that legally. Should check into that.
Well, that's another question, I think, Dan.
Mr. Chair, he is right. We do have to state the purpose of the referendum in the question to voters. And
Right.
yeah, I think the committee has every intention of
Right.
doing that, or recommending that to finance and personnel.
The other thing is, when do you want to run this referendum in the November election or April?
We have to give 70 days notice, Mr. Chair. We have to give 70 days notice to the clerk. So it's not possible to do it in November because we don't even know, we haven't even let the committees come up with what we'd be losing yet.
Just keep this in mind, the referendums have a much better chance of failing in November. They have a much better chance of passing in April.
Really? Okay,
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Renish?
I understand these numbers are for the eventual education process for the community. But I'm also concerned as board members are out there answering the questions, I know one that I would have would be, tell me how we've looked, meaning us, the board, have looked inside first at becoming more efficient to ensure that that's going on. What I'm seeing here is possibly the way we were approaching it before was we had to really tighten our budget and really get down to the nuts and bolts of basic operations of the county. But now we've kind of switched over to a referendum with talking all these big numbers. I just want to ensure that we're still going to look inside first and make sure we're running as efficient as we can. That doesn't get lost in this resolution and referendum and all the other things.
Thank you. Mr. Gotchel?
I was one of the committee members that proposed a resolution to get this moving with the $350,000 figure in 2024. My reason for doing that was there was concern that this exercise hadn't happened for the subsequent years through 2027. And I was interested in getting some advice going for the standing committees to consider for 2024. I think we owed that to them. Supervisor Murphy Lopez has brought exactly what we needed, an actual figure out to 2027. So I'll vote in favor of this amendment. I just want board members to consider that we're passing this today, not necessarily as marching orders, but this goes back to committees with real pictures of where we need to be. The answer for how do we make up these various gaps in 2027 from the standing committees may very well be we can't. And that is a practical answer, but we're never going to know what we need to shoot for, the deficit that we're trying to fill, and what potential questions we need on a referendum if we don't pass something like this.
Thank you. That was a nice explanation. Anyone else? All right, we're going to vote on the amendment. Okay. And it's covered in which 20A, is that right?
22A, Mr. Chair.
22A. Okay. So all those in favor of that amendment signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the amendment carries. Now we can vote on the resolution that was discussed at length, I think, so we know where we are. So all those in favor of the,
I don't think the motion, the underlying motion was ever brought.
I think it would.
It was.
Yeah.
First by Sean Murphy Lopez and a second by Mark Cooey to bring the amendment forward or to discuss the amendment.
Yeah.
And Ingrid did. I had Melissa or Mark Cooey and Ingrid Glassburner to begin discussion, and then a first by Murphy Lopez and a second by Cooey for the amendment discussion.
Okay, it was brought to the floor. And I would ask for an aye vote on the resolution under agenda item number 22. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Agenda item 22 as amended is passed. Takes us back then to item number 16. A resolution directing the Joint Ambulance Committee to consider services, develop options, and propose a recommendation on future operations. Mr. Kalish.
This would be resolution 22-90, and I believe we will do the same summary. Administrator Langrick, are
Yep.
you going to summarize them?
I certainly can. Thank you, Clerk Kalish. Item before you seen is, let me pull it up on the screen here as well for those folks at home. This is going to be item number 16 in the folder and on the website. You're looking at a resolution directing the Joint Ambulance Committee and specified tasks. 1, of completing the consideration matrix. 2, there is a zero levy for operations and capital expenditures. This is to develop a course of action if possible, where operations of services, ownership, and maintenance of all grounds, buildings, and equipment remain under Richland County, but which no foreseeable operational levy is required entering into 2024 and beyond. This course of action should include a business plan with expenditure and revenue projections and an autonomous capital management program for implementation no later than 01 January of 2026. In this as well then is bullet number 3, a course of action for utilization of levy exemption. Develop a course of action if possible where operations of services, ownership of all grounds, buildings, etc. again, are retained by Richland County, but also then in looking at what potential levy exemptions could be in place, not only for ambulance service, but then also potentially for the Sheriff's Department in meeting dispatching needs. Number 4 then is autonomous operation. It's develop a course of action if possible where operations of service ownership of all grounds, buildings, and equipment administrative services are no longer under Richland County. Essentially, the development of a autonomous ambulance district. Be it further resolved that we're asking for these to be completed no later than June 6th of 2023 for those items and actions. There is additional language then that would ensure if there, or that would call for if we proceeded with action number 4, which would be an autonomous ambulance district, that we would have such things in place as orderly transition of ambulance operations, employment of existing employees, furniture and services, and such are transitioned. And be looking for these folks to have this in place by for fiscal year of 2023 and beyond for the tax dollar levy, for the request of any tax dollar levy. Mr. Chair.
Excuse me, I thought you were done.
I am done. Go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Okay, you've heard the resolution. What's your pleasure? Mr. Cooey? Mr. Williamson seconds. Discussion? I'm aware that Director Gudgeon has talked to you, has he not? And has made changes as required. Is that right?
Correct. We made amendments to this at the last Finance and Personnel Committee meeting, adding the be it further resolved of the recommendations on if we were to proceed with the autonomous operation. So discussion points from the last Finance and Personnel have been incorporated into this resolution presented to you this evening, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right. All those in favor of the resolution indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The resolution is adopted. Number 17. Resolution notifying the Simons Natatorium and Richland Economic Development Department of future funding reductions and directing the Simons Natatorium Board and Richland Economic Development Board to consider services, develop options, and propose a recommendation on future operations. Mr. Langrick.
Mr. Chair, 2 directives here. First one's to this. Let me share this in a second. I apologize to our viewers at home. Here we are. 2 directives here. First, to the Simons Natatorium for operations to encourage to explore the transfer of Simons to a nonprofit organization, including research of similar nonprofit models, and return to Finance and Personnel Committee with a report by October 31st of 2022. Directive to Economic Development Operations, encourage the Red Board to explore a public-private partnership where public sources are make up half and private sources make up half of the economic development budget, and return to Finance and Personnel Committee with a report by October 31st of 2022. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. You've heard the resolution. What's your pleasure? Mr. Manning makes the motion, seconded by Mr. Renich. Discussion. Mr. Severson.
County, 3 years ago, Richland County didn't have economic development, and we were like, well, you know what? Let's maybe start it up because we need it because it's vital to us. And now, 3 years later, we're looking at possibility of maybe reduction. What's going to happen in 3 years from now? Are we going to look at maybe like, hey, let's add it back in? I'm just putting that in food for thought for the people who are going to discuss this and make a recommendation.
Thank you, Kerry. Yeah, we appear to be a little, I think the word is frenetic, but that's the nature of our business. I think 3 years ago, we did not have a sound picture of our financial future. Now we do. So that's why all of these considerations are before us. Mrs. Voice.
Mr. Chairman.
I just wonder how any of this is going to be perceived by the community. All these things that we're cutting and taking away have all either been supported by them or, you know, I I know we have to do this, but I mean, I think about Simons and how the money was donated to build this and how the community has so supported it. And now we're saying, we don't want to do this anymore. The ambulance, I always assume that in any county, you're going to have an ambulance, and most of them are not, the for-profit ones are for-profit, but many counties like us have public supported ambulances. And it makes me wonder when I see this that we're, and I voted for this, I'll admit it, but if we go private on these things, the cost for people is going to go way up. So they're paying, the taxpayers are going to be paying extra anyway. You know, our taxes are going to go up, and then there's more things. We're going to be paying for more ambulance rides. We're going to be paying for all the extras that we're cutting. So they're getting kind of a double whammy. At least that's the way I'm interpreting it, and that's the way people I've been talking to are interpreting it. So I think that we're going to have to really do a great job of selling this, because I'm having a hard time with it, and I have the information. I guess that's all I have to say. I'm voting for these because I don't know what the other option is,
Thank
but
you.
it's uncomfortable.
It's a tough one. Absolutely. Any
Thank
other
you.
comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mrs. Rudersdorf, it's first.
Just to back on what Ms. Boyce said, I have had a lot of constituents reach out to me with concern about letting Simons go, especially considering the majority of our population is at retirement age or older. This is the only facility that they have year-round to maintain their physical well-being. So just to kind of take that into consideration, there are a lot of constituents that are not pleased.
Thank you. Mr. Seep.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think we should take a breath and recognize that no one is saying that we're going to cut anything right now. We're trying to figure out a way to fund valued services in the county, which are currently, now, and in the future underfunded if we don't make changes. We have lots of questions that have to be answered as a part of this process, and it's not going to be an overnight process to get clear answers to all of the questions that are raised. Do we know the terms and conditions under which we accepted the donation for the Simons Center? Do we know the terms and conditions of the lease with the University of Wisconsin with regard to the land and what the implications are of trying to make decisions about that land use? There's a whole lot to discuss, but I think the important thing for us to remember here is that we're not setting off a fire alarm here. We're recognizing that we have problems, that we are underfunded because of years and years of reduced revenue from shared revenue from the state of Wisconsin. Unfortunately, we were, put over a little bump here with the American Rescue Fund, but that's going to run out. We have to, as a county board, put our heads together and decide if we're going to fund these services. If the county citizens want these services, it is incumbent upon us to be honest with them, as Sean has put forth here tonight, and to show them that the choices we have. We have, for the last 10 years that I've been here, and long before that, we have been cutting programs and services and laying off employees and freezing wages. You cannot continue to balance budgets on the backs of the most valuable resource in the county, which is our body of employees. We must do things to encourage the retention and the growth and the development of our employees, or we are going to retard the growth and the development of our county. We have to be realistic, and we have to be honest, and we have to have the courage to tell the truth to the community, and to let them have their say in the choice. And I think the only way that we're going to be able to do this is by a referendum. We cannot continue to put out the message that discourages and puts down the morale of employees throughout the county. People are quitting because they're hearing these rumors and they're scared of their own future and their own security. Sean, I thank you for your hard work, and you are presenting to us realism. None of us want to cut these valued services, but we do want to figure out a way to continue them in a feasible and reasonable way that is not a burden to either the county or citizenry. And so we have to work together with our citizens to solve this problem. I talked too long and too much.
Mr. Severson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just would like to add to Mr. Supervisor Seep's comments, and I do concur with those. I also would like to add to them that maybe we should include our state legislature in on these talks that we are having, not just our representatives currently that we have in the 17th district and 51st and 49th and whatever that we have, that maybe we include everybody in the state, and then also bring into effect that we might have to implement Chapter 5908. And I'll just leave it at that and let you do your research on that.
Okay, thank you. For your information, I just received the packet of proposals for the Wisconsin Counties Association, and prominent among them that we'll be voting on next month is the Richland County Resolution, which will be before the Counties Association, and it basically charts in graph form the reduction in state revenue to Richland County, and the other counties can do their own because theirs will be similar. So, yes, Mr. McGuire.
Yeah, I just want to echo those comments here. If we're going to cut, I think we should cut with the possibly new hiring, or if we're going to, through attrition, maybe leave a staff that might be one person lower than it was. But I tell you what, when we cut services, it's the same as cutting people. When you're right about the negative talk all over the county right now. I hear it every day. What's the matter with you? You know, they think we're not running the show right, but they wonder why do we not have enough money anymore? But keep that in mind. You cut services, you cut people. You got veterans that are very, very upset about what potentially is going to happen to them. I think we have to think about that. I agree with we have to make cuts, but I don't like the idea of the word services in the same sentence with the word cuts.
Thank
That's
you.
all I have to say.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Mr. Chair,
Yes. I'm not sure who spoke.
Supervisor Turk.
Yes, Mr. Turk.
In these discussions, we're ranging pretty far afield from the specific resolutions before us, and the sentiment being we need to think deeply about these things is entirely correct, and each one of these resolutions is a call to think deeply. And I just want to encourage folks that, you know, we are taking those steps to give due consideration to these processes. This is part of that process. These are not the final answers. We know they are very difficult propositions. That's why there needs to be so much analysis, so much data, and so much consideration given to each of them. And so just encourage folks to, as other folks have said, you remember, we're not saying cut these now. We're just talking about worst case scenarios. This is what's going to have to happen for each of these resolutions. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, we have a resolution before us. It's the one dealing with Simons and Red. And we know why we shouldn't do it. We know, so we've talked about that. So this gets the consideration back to the various committees. So all those in favor of resolution number 17 regarding Simons and Red signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, raise your hand if you were opposed. All right, I have one in the gallery. Was anyone on deck on the web? Okay, I'm going to say the resolution passed by voice vote. Does anyone question that? All right. Number 18. Resolution directing Pine Valley and Child Support Standing Committee to consider services, develop options, and propose a recommendation on future operations. Administrator Langdrick.
Mr. Chair, you're looking at item number 18 in your packet online. Looking at one paragraph for Pine Valley and child support operations, explore the possibility of Pine Valley generating profits that annually equal 50% of their mortgage payments to be used by the county for operations or capital projects outside of Pine Valley. In return to finance and personnel with a report by 10/31/2022. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. You've heard the resolution. What's your pleasure? Let's talk about it. Mr. McKee, second by Mr. Williamson. And I know that I'll call on Supervisor Severson, and I believe he's going to do a little parliamentary procedure here and give his time over to Ray Schmitz. So go ahead,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Severson.
I'd like to give up my time here to one of my constituents that has a desired interest in Pine Valley and an interest not only that he lives in the area of Pine Valley, but he also has land around Pine Valley and likes to see the support of that growing. So I would like to yield my time to Mr. Raymond Schmitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't take up much time. I'll be brief, but I attended the August 8th referendum ad hoc committee meeting, and there was a motion made to explore the possibility of Pine Valley to pay $500,000 annually back to Richland County. Now, it's the word explore, and that kind of sparked my interest. After listening to the morning show on WRCO this morning, I am now informed that that figure has risen to $750,000 that Pine Valley is expected to pay back to Richland County, if I understand that correctly. And the dagger is to be put in the heart of Pine Valley. This may do it. I would like to know how this request was researched to know, even if that is possible. I think you're just reaching at straws here. I like the idea or the practice that was put in for the past 3 years. Pine Valley meets all of its commitments and pays all its bills, and if it has money left over, it returns it to Richland County. Over the past 3 years, that has been over $1 million. Last year, 504,000 plus. So there are many variables that affect what Pine Valley can generate as income or the amount. Occupancy rate is one, and also the acuity level is also important. Now, during the pandemic, the numbers were down to the point where Pine Valley thought they might have to close one wing. That affects the amount of income. And so if you put a burden of 750,000 against them, I don't know how they could do that. And Pine Valley meets or generates enough income to satisfy the new employee wage increase. They have that, they generate that. And I think it was mentioned by Mr. Severson about our employees. And I'd like to just make a little comparison here. I'm a dairy farmer, and I'll compare, if I have 100 cows, you have 100 employees. I expect 100 pounds of milk from my cows. You expect 100% from your employees. However, I'm feeding my cows for 85 pounds of milk. You're paying your employees about 85% of what they should be getting. I knock the fat off the back of my cows and the calcium out of their bones doing that. You kind of do the same thing to your employees. Pretty quick, my cows are riding the fence, looking for greener grass on the other side. That's the same way your employees are doing. You're losing them. I know it's a hard thing to do, but it's realistic. The core is a good employee base. That's with any business. And we all know that. And I don't want to be critical, and I certainly don't envy your task here. It's tremendous, and I want to support you in any way we can, but I'd like to have you strike that 750,000 out and have the Pine Valley pay back what they can. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. McKee?
Yes, couple of questions. The wording is explore.
I believe it is.
Is the wording explore?
Explore the possibility.
If anybody can find it, Tom will be able to.
Right.
And also, I want to make the board aware is the county is already collecting from the taxpayers the debt service, annual debt service for Pine Valley. Now, however they arrange that around, but it's already being collected from the taxpayers. Secondly, the way the resolution is worded on the agenda is simply a rewording of the previous, so that must have changed since the agenda was put out.
Well, can someone clarify that, please? Make sure we have the current wording.
The wording on the agenda matches that of the resolution. From what I can see, the agenda says resolution directing the Pine Valley and Child Support Standing Committee to consider services, develop options, and propose a recommendation on future operations.
But that's not the case. We're supposed to explore debt service.
It has, yeah, it's not as far reaching as it would indicate on the,
Okay.
addendum.
So the resolution is going to be for Pine Valley to explore the debt service part,
I
right?
think everything else was taken out, memory serves, so this one's pretty simple. You're gonna pay half the debt service.
Yeah, okay.
and explore it. Mrs. Reuters or Mrs. Glassman.
Mr. Chair, so it says that annually equals 50% of the mortgage payments. What has it been in the last year or two?
About 1.4, I believe, Clerk Kalish, does that sound
Correct.
right?
Yes,
Wait,
that's
1.4 what?
Million?
million.
No, I mean percentage wise.
Not
If
follow.
there, okay, so it's saying, maybe I'm not understanding.
Oh, how
the
much has
wording.
been returned?
Yes.
Okay, an example, this year's budget is built on $500,000 that have returned from Pine Valley that we're reallocating to cover other general operating expenses. Previous year, I think it was about 300, and then our current budget going into 2023, I think, what that referencing is that we're looking to also utilize about $300,000 of Pine Valley revenues to supplement and support other.
What percentage is that? Was my question.
Uh,
I mean, ish.
Mr. Langrick, the debt service for the Pine Valley each year is 1.5 million, 1.4 million, is that right?
That's about
So-
23%.
So Pine Valley's share, if we can find it, will be $750,000, right?
Half,
And we're already contributing back
500.
$500,000 to the county. So we're short $250,000, right?
This current year, you're at $500,000 is anticipated. Going forward into 2023, I think we have about $300,000 right now that we're expecting.
Yeah, that's what's being budgeted, but we often
Sweet.
put more in there.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable to take a look at this. I would urge you to vote yes. Mr. Seep,
Mr.
a quick
Chairman,
comment, please.
pardon?
A quick comment and then we'll vote.
Yes, the operative word is explore. This is going to go back to the Pine Valley Standing Committee for Pine Valley. And perhaps that exploration may bring back a logical answer that does not produce the desired 750,000. There's no assurance here, based upon our decision tonight, of how much Pine Valley is going to be able to produce. And it will vary from time to time, from month to month, from year to year. That's it.
Yep, thank you. All right, thank you for all your comments. Thank you, Ray, for your comments. I'm going to call for a vote. And we're voting on the resolution for Pine Valley. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the resolution is.
Opposed, aye.
Thank you. Okay. Number 19, a resolution notifying the Fair and Recycling Coordinator and the Parks Commission of future pending reductions and directing the Richland County Fair, Recycling and Parks Standing Committee to consider services, develop options, and propose a recommendation on future operations. What's your pleasure? Cooey, seconded by Renish. Discussion.
So,
And
Mr. Chair, this one is up on your screen right now. And I'm sorry, I should have brought this to everybody's attention before we voted on the last one. I'm going to make a typo change on a date on the Pine Valley one. On the in the paragraph calling for action, it gave an October 31st date. And then on the next whereas, it calls for completion and returning back to the Finance and Personnel by June 6, 2023. I'm going to change that June 6 to match the October 31st, so it's consistent with the intentions of what the bullet was. The Fair and Recycling Committee agenda, resolution. You're looking at item number 19 in your packets and online. Paragraph 1 is the remaining paragraph that's in the resolution. It calls for the committee to explore the transfer of the fairgrounds to a nonprofit agricultural society, including research on peer counties with a nonprofit fair model, and return to finance and personnel by November 30th, 2022 with a report. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So the resolution wants to look at how other counties are doing it, and it's reasonable. Mr. Manning.
Yes, before we vote on this, I'd like to remind everybody that the fairgrounds has a $15,000 a year tax levy. And it affects thousands and thousands of Richland County residents. Just like keep that in mind when we vote.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, to many people, the fair is Richland County. I mean, I used to come back here when I was living away down in the Devil's Playground in Dane County, and I'd come back to Richland County for the fair. So, anyone else? Mr. Gotcha.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'd like to propose an amendment just for a couple words. So regarding fair operations, to explore the transfer of, and I'd like to strike the fairgrounds and insert fair operations. To make that a little more clear, it sounds like we're trying to offload property here, and I believe that sends the wrong intent.
Okay, an amendment. Do I have a second to that amendment? Mr. Renish. So motion by Gotcho for amendment, second by Renish. And he's changing, striking the word fairgrounds, I guess, right? Okay. So regarding fair operations, it would now read the transfer of the fair operations to a nonprofit ag society. So, Mrs. Ruderstorff.
Would the county still insure the property that the fairground?
Well, I don't know.
No, it would, so then the nonprofit would be the one to insure it,
Possibly,
because it is in a floodplain.
right.
I don't know very many nonprofits that would want to engage with.
But those are questions that we would hope would be answered and when the recommendation is made back. So I would say, we've got an amendment here to change, take out the transfer of the fairgrounds. I'm not sure how that would work, Tim, but maybe. I'd like to see how the other counties do it. I mean, Vernon County, for instance, I think someone else owns their fairgrounds, I believe, but I don't know that for a fact, so. Okay, so we'll vote on the amendment. The amendment takes out transferring ownership of the fairgrounds and simply talks about operations of the fair. So a yes vote means we take out the fairgrounds, and a no vote means we don't. So, Mr. Williamson.
That what you were thinking, just fair operations or the calendar year? I guess I'd ask Mr. Severson if he had an opinion on that as well.
Can I clarify?
Yes, please.
I believe fair operations leaves the door open for the fairgrounds. The way this reads, we're exploring the transfer of the fairgrounds to a nonprofit agricultural society. Doesn't say anything about keeping the fair going or pursuing future operations. That is the point of my clarification for the amendment.
Mr. Severson.
I appreciate what Mr. Goschel was saying. So the fair grounds itself is land that the county has. County relinquishes control of land We have no other land. And the only way that we can get that back is one, by buying it, or two, eminent domain, which we have to give money back. So if we got future needs for the county where we maybe need to develop a public safety building or vice versa, a new courthouse, where are we gonna get that land at? We're wanting to sell the campus. Just gonna do eminent domain. I think that'll go good over with our constituents. I agree with what Mr. Gotcha is saying here, and I support that.
Okay. Are we ready to vote? Does everyone know what we're voting on the amendment? In other words, all he talks about is operations of the fair, I believe, right? Not year-round operations, but somebody wanted to have a tractor pull there. Who would control it? In your mind, Tim?
That's a bit off topic, perhaps. Not dodging the question, but
I mean, those are questions I have, so. All right, I'll call a roll call, I think, on this, because I see it, we're gonna be all over the board. The amendment is not to transfer ownership of the fairgrounds, but the fair operations. So, yes, vote means you're in favor of that, no means you're against. Mr. Kalish, call the roll, please.
Okay, I'll start with Rudersdorf. Gentis,
Aye.
Turk,
No.
Cosgrove, Frank,
Aye.
Severson,
Yes.
Williamson,
Yes.
Cooey, Fleming, Boyce,
Yes.
McGuire, Carroll,
Yes.
Murphy Lopez,
Yes.
Brewer,
No.
Seep, McKee, Renish, Luck,
Yes.
Manning, Gotcho,
yes.
and Glassburner.
Yes.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Motion carries 16, yes.
Okay, so the amendment carries. So now we have before us a new resolution that basically says the committee is tasked to work in conjunction, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. To explore, well, maybe that's out now, transfer to the nonprofit. So someone tell me how we've amended this resolution, please.
Mr. Chair, it'll read to explore the transfer of fair operations to a nonprofit agricultural society, et cetera.
Okay. So the number 1 is completely changed then regarding fair operations. All right. We'll vote on the main motion then. All those in favor of the resolution regarding the fair signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, the resolution is adopted. Thank you. Number 20, resolution notifying UW Richland leadership, UW Extension Office, and Food Services of future funding reductions and directing the Richland County Education Standing Committee to consider services, develop options, and propose a recommendation on future operations. Administrator Langrick.
Mr. Chair, in your packet, you'll see item number 20 with the same type of a comparable resolution. It's broken into several sections. First section of UW campus, second section of regarding food services, and third section regarding UW Extension Office. The top section of that on the bottom of page 1 regarding UW campus, it is a bullet on there of existing. It is develop a course of action of an existing agreement with no levy It's calling for develop a course of action if possible where ownership of all grounds property is retained by Richland County and services are provided through Platteville Richland, but on which no foreseeable county levy dollars are needed for any future operations and capital expenditures entering into 2025 and beyond. Number 2 is to explore a more cost-effective and efficient use of land and buildings. Number 3 is explore the return of recruiting and admissions to UW Platteville campus and UW Richland campus. And number 4 is explore dollar for dollar match of UW Richland Foundation for capital projects not to exceed $100,000 a year in exchange for the county committing to continue to allocate a minimum of $20,000 a year for insurance and $100,000 for capital maintenance projects. The second section regarding food services, it calls in paragraph 5 for, again, the consideration, service consideration matrix. It calls then for develop a course of action of existing model with no levy. Like the other one, it's in operating with zero levy impact in 2024 and beyond. Number 7 is develop a course of action for the discontinuation of existing services, including elimination of county funding, reassignment and separation of existing staff, necessary changes in policy and appropriations or liquidation of all assets, grounds, equipments, and facilities in the best interest of the county. The final section there regarding UW extension under paragraph 8, it calls for a service reduction. This is develop a course of action for prioritizing services to operate at 20% reduction by 2024 from a 2022 year budget of approximately $37,000. And this is offered by Finance and Personnel. In your packet, though, there is also a recommendation for potential amendment brought forward again by Vice Chair Murphy Lopez. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. You've heard the resolution. What's your pleasure? Mrs. Glassman, Mr. Manning, seconds. Discussion?
Mr. Chair, can I add a little clarification on that last comment? from
Yes,
Mr.
please.
Langrek? So, at the Education Committee last week, I did bring forward an amendment, and the Education Committee recommended that that move forward to the full county board.
Thank you.
The Finance and Personnel Committee never saw this amendment. So just
Thank you.
process.
Yes, for clarification, it was Supervisory Committee is making the recommendation for amendment. Thank you.
Yeah, so I would make a motion that 20A be moved forward with the, hopefully I don't confuse things too much, but the way the Education Committee looked at it was at the bottom of page 1 of 20A. So this amendment I'm moving forward, everything's accurate in 20A except one thing at the bottom of page 1. There should still be a letter 3, I'm sorry, a number 3, and then it should say explore, and then it should have a letter A that says the return of recruiting and admissions from the UW Platteville campus to UW Richland campus. And B, explore a dollar for dollar match by UW Richland Foundation for capital projects not to exceed $100,000 a year in exchange for the county committing to continue to allocate a minimum of $20,000 a year for insurance and $100,000 a year for capital maintenance projects. So it's meant to make both points contingent upon the county's continued allocation of funding. So the return of recruiting and admissions, that would also be contingent. We would need that condition to occur in order to continue our commitment. And so that's why that number 3 should be there, and A and B should be separate. So hopefully I haven't confused things too much.
Okay, so we have a motion to amend. Do we have a second? Mr. McGuire, are you seconding? I need a second. Mr. Williamson seconds. Ask a question, Mr. McGuire.
Well, Sean, you said it. You hope you didn't confuse. I'm confused here. Do we have 2 different committees working on a site?
Yes,
That's kind of what it sounds like.
absolutely.
Huh?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
And it didn't, the standing committee and the initial desire of the finance committee was to move these resolutions along, address them at a board meeting, which we are tonight, and then get them over to the standing committees for consideration. That was the initial. And they've been amended and
Yes,
puzzled
it makes it very confusing to.
It does.
To grasp the entire thought.
Yes, I agree, but they are
Here,
confusing issues. Mrs.
Good,
Black,
normally I'm the only one that's confused, so.
point of order, I don't think we were done discussing all the amendments. I don't know if we should have voted on it yet because
Yeah.
there was more to the amendment.
The added amendments then continue into regarding food service of striking paragraph 5, striking paragraph 7. And then in the final part then on the final, the second to last, be it therefore resolved of striking the June 6th date and changing that to October 31st of this year to again match what we're doing with some of the other resolutions and trying to get that information back to the referendum ad hoc committee.
okay, so we did vote on the amendment, did we not?
No, we did not.
Okay. Can we take all of the amendments at one time on this resolution?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Okay, Mr. McKee, you're making a motion to consider all the amendments. And that is seconded by Mrs. Ruderstorff. Okay.
Discussion.
Mrs. Glassman.
I guess I would ask if Supervisor Murphy Lopez could explain why our thought process behind the food service portion.
Boy, I didn't hear you, Ingrid, so I hope.
Sorry, I thought I'm talking clearly. I was asking if Supervisor Murphy Lopez could explain the decision behind striking the 2 paragraphs in the food service portion of that.
Okay, Supervisor Murphy Lopez,
Well,
please answer.
I think if Supervisor Gentis were in the room, she could probably best answer it, but I know she's on the phone. And I think the concern that she had expressed was the sale. If we're no longer talking about the sale of the campus, which we already did remove, similar to what we did with these other resolutions for Fair, Simons, Pine Valley. The thinking was, let's remove the sale of UW food service as well.
This is Supervisor Jenis. I agree
Yes,
that
please.
is the, if we're going ahead with the nutrition program, I think that we'd be looking at other services there, but not selling the equipment off.
Okay. All right, are we ready to vote on the amendments then? All those in favor of the amendments signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, now we have the amended resolution. And does anyone require a line-by-line reading, or can we vote on it now? Let's vote on it. Let's vote on sending this resolution to the standing committee and getting back their report, which is where we started about a month ago. But all those in favor of the resolution signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Got one no. Thank you, Mr. McGuire. Maybe you're the only one who understood it. Who knows? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Number 21, a resolution directing the Land and Zoning Standing Committee to consider services, develop options, and propose a recommendation on future operations.
Mr. Chair, let me pull it up here. So you're looking at a resolution comparable to the other ones. This one is directed to that committee. They're going to be number 1, completing the service consideration matrix. In paragraph 2, it's going to be develop a course of action for levy expenditure reduction, develop a course of action if possible where departments and budgets under the supervision have a total projected levy operational expense reduction of $50,000 entering into 2024 and same sustained reduction beyond. These sustained adjustments in expenditures must account for projected increase in COLA compensation policy and other employee benefits, including with the financial plan. And then this is to be resolved and back to Finance and Personnel June 6th of 2023, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. You've heard the resolution. What's your pleasure? Mr. Renish, Mr. McKee seconds. Do we have discussion?
Mr. Chair.
Carroll. Supervisor Carroll.
Thank you. I'm wondering if this report date of June 6th is correct, or do we want to move this to the October like the other ones?
Mr. Chair, I was going to say the same thing.
Right, Mr. Langrick, can we accept that as a typo?
I haven't taken this guidance out of committee, so not to be a stickler, but I think I'd like a motion on it.
Okay. A motion to
Carroll,
amend.
Murphy Lopez.
Murphy Lopez, second by McKee. We're amending the dates. All those in favor of the amendment, signify by saying aye.
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 Okay. So we have the amended change in the dates, but basically it reads as before you then.
Mr. Chair, can I just make one comment?
You may.
So this was a lot, and we spent hours and many meetings in finance going through all these, and I agree with you, Supervisor McGuire. It was confusing. It really was. And to come up with what actually everyone could get behind, it took a lot of work, and it's not all perfect. But I do want to say, I think we're past the point where departments and standing committees can now say, I'm sorry, I just can't make those cuts. We have to know what you would cut. And it doesn't all have to go on the referendum. To Supervisor Renish's point that he made earlier, some standing committees and departments may decide, you know what, we can actually cut this position, or we can change the way we deliver this, or we can contract it out and we can save the county money. Great. Not everything has to go on the referendum, but we really need to know. I don't think any department now can just say, I'm sorry, we just can't do anything else. We have to know, because if the referendum fails, we need to tell the public what they're going to lose. So I just want to say, I think things are very different now. I didn't like these resolutions when they first came out. It was all way too rushed, but Marty, Clint, they gave us the time. The committee figured it out, and so now I think we're really ready to move forward. So.
It has to either be in the paper or a handout. Okay, not on the record. Public benefit, what they're going to, what they're going.
You're a veteran of the referendum wars, Dan. I think you ought to come to their meetings then. So, yeah. Okay. Where are we? We did 22.
We need a motion.
No,
to
we
accept
haven't.
the amendment.
We have a motion and.
Yep.
And we voted on the amendment. So now we're voting on the main resolution. So all those in favor of the resolution dealing with land and zoning signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Opposed? Motion is adopted. Okay, we did 22 first. Appointments to various boards, commissions, and committees.
I have none this evening, Mr. Chair.
You have none? Do you have a report for us?
For brevity's sake, reminder that tomorrow is Finance and Personnel budget hearings. They start at 8 a.m. I should say their budget hearings delivered to the administrator. Finance and Personnel members will be in attendance. If we have a quorum, we'll be in session and being able to engage in discussion and actions as properly agended. But it's going to go from 8 a.m. until 4:30. We'll have WebEx set up, and then also it'll be recorded. And that'll be all again in context of the 2023 budget. On August 22nd at 6 p.m. is your next referendum ad hoc committee. That'll be in the county boardroom. Certainly encourage folks, if you're interested and want to further understand that and get ahead of that one, opportunity there. And then following budget hearings on December 6th will be the next Finance and Personnel. That'll be at 1 p.m. At that meeting, there'll be a presentation then of a proposed 2023 budget for Finance and Personnel to begin considering. Mr. Chair.
Any correspondence?
I have none, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Maybe. Who knows? Mr. McGuire? Motion to adjourn?
Sorry,
I'm down to adjournment. Do you want to make the motion?
I make a move to adjourn.
Thank you. Seconded by Manning. We are adjourned. We could vote on it, but we've been here long enough.